So today I have a new DC Absolute Edition. It's Absolute Multiversity, and Absolute Editions are basically the premier copy of a story. Um, so I have probably 10 to 12 Absolute Editions. There's a lot of Absolute Editions that I look at that I'm just not interested in. Either they're stories that I or characters I don't care about, or I just don't think they're worthy of an absolute edition. So I'm kind of running out of stories I'd even want to see in an absolute edition. But Multiversity is one that I really, really enjoy. This was one that I collected when it came out. I have each issue, and I enjoyed it enough that I have this, which is the deluxe edition, which means I'm triple buying on this one. So that shows you how much I enjoyed it. The way it's written is it's kind of a storytelling style that I actually am not a huge fan of. And I've complained about this kind of style of storytelling, but Grant Morrison really makes it work. It's through his talent, his creativity, that he makes it all work. And a lot of the success, I think, is due to him being paired up with some of the best artists out there. But basically, there's not really much of a story behind it. It's a long, it's what 10 comics, I think, and with a very kind of a shallow thread tying them. But I'll go through it and then kind of explain. So basically, what Grant Morrison did was he did, I believe, 8 issues. So here we have, for instance, so there's a framing story that starts here, and this is Multiversity issue 1. And then we go into the first issue, which is Society of Superheroes. So basically, all of these issues are taking place in different parallel worlds. And in this case, the Society of Superheroes is kind of a mashup of the Justice Society and Legion of Superheroes, except just in the name. The characters themselves, I don't think, bear any resemblance to the Legion of Superheroes. But we have Doc Fate, which I believe is a combination of Dr. Fate and, oh God, was it Doc Savage or something? I can't remember. But it's really a fun story, and I love the artwork. And that's one of the reasons. So there's Abin Sur, but he's kind of a mashup. And he's wearing somewhat the costume of the original Green Lantern. But Grant Morrison is just having so much fun with just playing with these characters. And there is Vandal Savage. And we have a couple worlds that are colliding. There's Al Pratt Adam, Blockbuster, and he's just having so much fun. Felix Faust. And so we have Vandal Savage versus the Immortal Man, which was, oh gosh, what was that? I'm trying to remember his name. I can't remember his name. But he was a caveman stories from the 1970s, I believe. So it ends on a cliffhanger. And then we go into Just Us, which is basically the young, you could see it's kind of like one of those old, or I guess maybe they still make them, the like teen magazines, Teen Beat or Tiger Beat or whatever. And basically all of the young superheroes have nothing to do because Superman created a legion of robots that take care of the Earth. They protect the Earth. So the young superheroes have all become shallow and vapid and just like to go out and party. And that's it. Now, what kind of links these stories together is this idea of a cursed comic book. And the comic book is having effects on all these different worlds. And each one of these worlds sees the other worlds as kind of comic book characters, not real. And then they start to dawn on them that these are all real realms, and that these comic books kind of tap into the different realms. It's interesting. So you're going to look at that and you say, oh, that's Doctor Doom. Well, what he does is, now he can't use the Marvel characters, so basically creates other versions of the Marvel characters. A Big Baby or something, which is supposed to be the Hulk, and it's not an insulting homage. I think that he was being respectful to the characters. But in this story, the Marvel Universe does exist, but he calls it something else, and I can't remember what the name of it is. But it's really, really interesting and fun. This one wasn't my favorite, but they're all good. None of them, I think, are bad. This one I loved, Pax Americana. Great artwork by Frank Wiley. Basically what he decided to do was do the Watchmen, or the Watchmen universe, except actually use the Charlton characters, which is what Alan Moore originally wanted to do. And I loved this story. This is probably, this one's up there among all of these stories. In fact, it's one of my favorite comics of all time. And we still have, rather than having Dr. Manhattan, he simply has Captain Atom, and acting very similar to Dr. Manhattan. Thunderworld, another fantastic story. I'm a huge Captain Marvel fan, so it was really nice to see that Grant Morrison was able to do justice to the character. Great artwork, great story. Again, they're all tied together, kind of with this, right? Okay, so there he is reading one of the other comic books. So this is the Society of Superheroes. You can see that's the exact cover. And they're making reference to this, and a bit of confusion as to what's going on. This is another one of the framing stories. This is the Multiversity Guidebook. A really interesting comic. There is a story in here, but then it just goes through all the different 52 Earths, where you can see that Grant Morrison is really using his creativity. And I think that's one of his strengths. I think that's probably his main strength, is just creativity. Mastermen. So basically, Superman, this is kind of similar to Red Sun. Superman lands in Nazi Germany and becomes a pawn of Hitler. And it's 50 years later, and a group has stood, and there's a whole evil Justice League, actually. And the group that's standing against them is the Freedom Fighters. And it's so cool. This has one of my favorite scenes in here. Basically, the evil Justice League, or the Nazi Justice League, capture the human bomb, and he manages to escape. They've been torturing him all this time for information, but he won't speak. And he says here, were you boys on your way to torture me some more? Leatherwing, I didn't feel a thing. See, my body absorbs, stores, and converts energy. I didn't survive the explosion. I am the explosion, the human bomb. I love that moment. I love that moment because he's saying, your torture didn't do anything to me except make me stronger. Then we get into, this is the cursed comic book, Ultra. This is the comic book that kind of had been framing all these stories. And so it had a lot to live up to. What is Alan Moore going to do to make a cursed comic? And I think he absolutely delivers. This is an amazing comic book. I loved this. It is probably... Grant Morrison has done this before, where he created a metaphysical comic book where the character would communicate with the reader. But I think this is about the limit that he took it to, and I think it was really spectacular. This is another one of my favorite comic books of all time. Then we get back into, this is the final framing story, Multiversity, and the only issue 2. All the other ones are issue 1. And now they're going to fight against the evil, which is this super judge, and the gentry. The gentry, this is what the gentry look like. And so all the heroes of these various worlds are fighting against the gentry. And then we get, this is kind of classic Grant Morrison, then we get kind of suddenly a different villain at the very end. Who is this guy? I don't know. But the story just ends. They're kind of saying, all right, we need to get ready. We need to fight this evil. And then it's almost like Grant Morrison was like, oh, I only got a couple pages left. I'll just end it. So they're getting ready for the fight. Operation Justice Incarnate. And then it's over. So I don't know if this was another cliffhanger or if that was the conclusion. But you see them fighting, but it feels like they don't really. I mean, the guy comes out. There he is. And he says, I will choose when next week. Well, I guess he's saying I'm heading out of here. I will choose when. But okay, so here's the thing. Each one of these concludes on a cliffhanger, and therein lies the problem. And I love this, and I read through the whole thing again, which is why I'm not discussing this now rather than a week ago when I received this comic. So I read through the whole thing. This was intended to be the first, and then there was going to be a Multiversity 2, TOO. And it never happened. Now, when I read through the description of Multiversity 2, it sounded like he was creating all new stories. But when you go in here and Grant Morrison discusses what he intended with Multiversity, and he says it's an 8-issue series comprising six one-shot. Okay, so it's 8 issues, not okay. Each issue takes place on a different parallel world from the DC multiverse. And functions as a #1 issue and Bible for potential series which could be spun off in a line of multiverse books. Each issue is drawn by a different artist. That never happened. So people have kind of taken up the mantle and extended his ideas, but I've never seen one that did justice to this, even close. And I really don't collect that much, so I don't know, but I don't believe any of these storylines ever were. I mean, I would love to see more. I would collect a Masterman comic. But the problem is that when it's handed off to a lesser writer, they don't do it justice. And Thunderworld would have been a great Captain Marvel series. And they have had Shazam. They've had several Shazam series, and they were nowhere near the quality of this. So it's not like they just didn't use the character. It's just that Grant Morrison did a great job. And I have not loved everything Grant Morrison did, but this is just so much fun. And so it's really a shame. I think that of all the series that I would love to see continued, Multiversity 2 would be probably #1 on my list. But Grant Morrison, he's just kind of doing his own thing now, and that's cool. But I'm not sure he works for DC or does any contracting work for DC anymore. So we might never see it, but I think it would have been really, really cool. And, he's not ancient. He could come back and continue working on it. But I don't think that any of these series are going to, I think their expiration date is kind of past. So. But anyway, that's what I wanted to say about Multiversity 2. I highly recommend it. I haven't loved every Absolute edition, but this one, this is heavy. That's why I lay it on a couch. There is an absolute ton of raw images, the pencil images. I don't really get into that much. I don't get into it that much. It's cool and all, but this is all, let's see. The story ends here, and this is all the extras. There's a lot of extras, and you can see that all of this with the color on it, that's all drawings. And the amount of actually description by Grant Morrison on this story is only like 5 pages long. I would have loved to have seen more, and I'd love to see not only his kind of ideas prior, but just kind of a summary of his thoughts afterwards. The best I saw was when they had the All-Star Superman Deluxe Edition. And there was a whole discussion by Grant Morrison, and it added so much to the story. But this is a really fun book. I highly recommend it. One of my favorites. I can read this one over and over again, and it's one of those stories where the more I read it, the better it becomes, and that's not always the case. The one I did with Doomsday Clock, every time I read it, I like it less and less. This one I like more and more. So anyway, that's the new Multiversity Absolute from DC Comics.